Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I'm back for another solo one. This time, we're talking all things relationship check-ins. This is something I've been doing since the start of my relationship. It is by far the most important thing. A lot of people have asked about it, and for that reason, we're going deep into it. In this week's episode, expect to learn the step-by-step process of how Shani and I do our weekly check-ins. The things to avoid when it comes to your check-ins, why this is the most important thing in my relationship, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Gang, what is up? I hope you are very well wherever in the world you are listening to this episode. So this episode's another solo episode, albeit very different to my recent solo episodes. If you haven't listened to the recent ones, that's kind of a bit of back story and history around my capitulation and reinventing myself. This one's more, it's like in a roundabout way, a mini masterclass of sorts. And these I'll be doing more regularly. And generally speaking, they'll be based on kind of what's floating in my space at the time. And with that in mind, this first one's very much around the relationship check-in, which is probably the most popular tool that I've put out to the world, and one that continues to show up in conversations that I have. So I'm going to talk through how Shani and I do it. Hopefully there's some things that you can take away and implement. And that's the goal of these, mini masterclasses, workshops, whatever you want to call them, is to have something that you can then take into your world. So in terms of a bit of back history about the relationship check-in, after my last breakup, which was, I think, about 5 years ago, decided that I was sick and tired of not being able to make sense of relationships, tired of heartbreak, heartache, and couldn't really work out what I was doing wrong. In fact, in my ignorance, thought I wasn't doing anything wrong. I thought it was all about my partners. So off the back of that last breakup, I went deep diving into all things relationships. And for about 18 months, literally just soaked up everything that I could. And strangely enough, I realized that I was a big part of the problem. Probably, in all honesty, a much bigger part of the problem. And I learned a lot in that 18 months. One of the keys that I learned was around communication. And when I reflected on my communication in previous relationships, I saw a number of ways in which it was very toxic and also very dysfunctional. It'd be passive aggressive. I would be nice guy. I would project what was going on for me internally out through my social media, and then, hope that my girlfriend at the time would see it. Just literally like toxic as can get. So as I had this rude awakening, I started to think about how I could do life a little bit better and a little bit differently whenever my next relationship was to come. And when Shani and I started dating, we literally implemented this from the first week of our relationship. We'd been friends for 6 months before, like really good friends. And we'd had conversations around this type of thing, this rituals of connection, relationship check-in type thing. So it didn't seem very strange or too forward to implement something like this from day one. Now, that's up to you what you want to do. If for whatever reason I was in another relationship, I'd do the exact same thing again, even if I didn't know them, just because I think it's really healthy to communicate this. But if you're trying to play chill, or got games going on or whatever, or you feel uncomfortable, you can bring it in later. You just got to bring it in. To speak to that as well, this tool is only as effective as how often you use it. So Shani and I have been dating for 3 years, and we haven't missed one of these conversations, which means we've had 150 odd conversations of this sort. And I can think of a few weeks where we had a couple of them just because there was some heat. So we've had at least 150, I'd probably say close to 175. The only time that we've missed a Sunday check-in is when something else was going on that kind of was unavoidable. So there was a week where I was on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, didn't have my phone, didn't have access to Shani. There's been a couple of retreats that I've been hosting where I just couldn't leave the retreat. And then there's things like, one of us might be interstate and have a lot going on, something like that. If that's the case, we'd always move it to a Monday, or if for whatever reason, a Tuesday. So again, it's only going to be as effective as how instilled into your relationship it is. We picked Sunday. It just kind of made sense for us, and we had the most flexibility and freedom, and we weren't too in work and things like that. Most couples that I know also do it on a Sunday off the back of me working with them or me suggesting it. And then, there are some people that do other days. Find a day that works for you. We just do a Sunday. When it comes to when on a Sunday, there's a bit more flexibility in that. Generally, it will be the afternoon. I tend to have run club on a Sunday morning, but it's somewhere between kind of mid-morning and afternoon. And that can look different, but generally it's one of three places. It's either when we go for a walk, when we go for a drive, or sometimes late at night in bed when we're about to go to bed. And one of the things that we found really beneficial is doing it kind of side by side. So instead of the very, at times, intimidating, like front on sitting, at a table across from each other, driving while we're kind of looking in the same direction next to each other, walking, same thing, or even lying in bed where you might be looking at the ceiling or whatever, tends to kind of take away awkwardness if there is some. Now, I think realistically, after 150 to 170 of these, Shani and I could easily sit front on to each other and do it pretty comfortably. But if you're in the early stages of really using your voice or really speaking up, then I would suggest that kind of side-on approach just to take, any of those factors out. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk you guys through how we do it, and then hopefully that is in some way beneficial to you. If you haven't downloaded my Rituals of Connection or my Relationship Check-In ebook, I'll put it in the show notes here. That's a really good place to start because it gives you, I think I've got 52 questions in there. So there's literally like one question that you could ask your partner every week for the next 12 months in order to have a deeper understanding of them and also strengthen the relationship. And the quality of your questions will highly determine the quality of your relationship. So if you don't know how to ask good questions, or you haven't got any questions in mind, that is a good place to start. All right. So as I said, the same day each week, we do Sunday, up to you. Most people that I know do a Sunday as well. We either go for a walk or a drive, or we are lying next to each other in bed. The next thing that follows is that I go first. And one of the reasons for that is when it comes to a healthy masculine, feminine polarity dynamic, it's important for the masculine to go first or to lead where possible. Now, there's definitely going to be times and places that it doesn't necessarily make sense for you to lead. But as a general rule of thumb, to maintain healthy polarity in our relationship, I lead a lot. I'm not going to go into polarity now. It's a topic for another conversation. Just be mindful of the difference between leading and controlling. They're very different. Some people get those two mixed up. So what does it look like for you to lead if you're the male listening to this, generally speaking, or if you're the masculine presence, as opposed to being led? So that's the first thing. We then start it with like a general overview of how our week's been. So it's along the lines of like, just a kind of a reflection on the week that was. And that can be more a personal thing first. Good week, bad week, what made it a good week, what made it bad week, what did you love? And then we go into kind of relationship specifics. So as an example, at time of recording this, we got back from Bali a few days ago. And my kind of reflection was how good Bali was for me, for us. And I kind of reflected on, Mount Batua, which is a climb that we did, being, my favorite memory and moment with Shani. And then we kind of spoke about, coming back into Byron. And generally I feel a bit heavy and depleted and at times anxious when I come back into Byron. There's no reason for it. It's not like the Sydney days where I didn't like going back to my life as such. Like I love coming back to Byron. And I thought I had anchored something going on with Byron, but I kind of spoke in our most recent one of like, fuck, I feel like it's whatever that piece was that I was holding on to has gone. And I've landed back in Byron feeling a lot better, which is a cool thing for me. Anyway, enough about me. So we'll then talk about that. And then we'll finish with what I'm grateful for. So for example, last week, what I'm grateful for in particular, sorry, in our relationship, or what I'm grateful for about Shani. And what I said was, for example, last week, I was super grateful that she was prepared to get up at 1:45 in the morning to go and do Mount Batur, which, loves her sleep. And anyone who's sane doesn't love getting up in the middle of the night to go hiking. So that was what I was grateful for. And then Shani will go after that. And then we'll finish with questions that we have for each other. So generally speaking, there might be a question that comes up during the week or something that I've read that kind of sparks my interest. And every now and then I'll actually write it down in my phone as a reminder to come back to it. As I said, with questions, there's 52 in the ebook that you can download. And if for whatever reason, nothing's kind of sparking your mind from the week, something really simple could be like, how could I have supported you better last week? Or how can I support you better in this kind of coming week? Something really basic like that is really helpful. And albeit a really simple question, how could I have supported you better? It's really powerful because no matter how long you've been in a relationship for, the moment you think you know your partner, there's a level of ignorance that comes with that. And there's some really cool research, and I haven't got off the top of my head, from the Gottman Institute, who I've studied through, around on only 30% of the occasions when the Gottman researchers asked a partner a question, did they get it right? And that was relationships that were 3+ years on. So that essentially, to kind of break down the maths, that essentially means that only 30% of the time, 3 out of 10 times, do people get it right about their partner when asking a question. All right. So no matter how well you think your partner, don't fall into the ignorant trap of thinking you've got it all sorted, and be sure to ask them. So that's kind of the real basic format and structure for how we do it. Now, in terms of time, it can range. We've had some last like 5 minutes, and I'm kidding you not, 5 minutes. I think one like 3 weeks ago was 5 minutes. And then I reckon at time of recording, I'm recording this on a Monday, I reckon yesterday's might have been the longest. It was probably about 50 minutes. We went for a walk, and it was like we've got a 5.5K loop that we do. And it was pretty much, by the time we got home, we just finished it. So they can be short, they can be long. There's no right or wrong. Some will have a lot of energy behind them and a lot won't. And this is one thing that I'd get you to be really mindful of if you're starting this for the first time, is if you've had poor communication skills up till now, you've probably got a laundry list of things that you haven't spoken of that have gone unsaid. The worst thing you could possibly do is open the full can of worms at once, because it's not going to be that enticing for your partner to come back to this conversation if they've just copped pure heat for an hour straight. All right. So yes, you might look at the laundry list of things that you want to talk about and go, fuck, it's probably about 150 here. That's all right. Start with one. You've got time. If the relationship's going to work, you've got time. Just take it bit by bit. The other thing to be really mindful of, and there's more to this that is probably outside the realms of this conversation, but do your best to start with heart. And anyone who knows Shani knows that she is elite at being heart-centered, more heart-centered than any human I've ever met. So that came naturally to her, but it didn't come very naturally to me. I went into this kind of protective energy, wounded energy, like that hardened energy, almost like an argument was going to start. And over time, she helped me re-anchor a much better approach, what the Gottman Institute call a gentle startup. So my point doesn't get lost in the gentle startup, but there's a very different tone and a sequence of events that takes place in order for that to happen. So the first 3 minutes of a conversation, this type of conversation, your relationship check-in, will set the tone for the rest. So for you to be really mindful, and in all honesty, you're probably not going to get it right the first time. Well done if you do, but like it might take a bit of time to retrain yourself to learn to start with heart instead of coming in with that kind of hardened, jaded energy. The other thing to be really mindful of is to let the other person speak through. So instead of cutting them off and getting defensive, and again, there's other formulas for how to do this that will prevent you getting too defensive. But I just wanted to give you the framework today. So instead of the other person getting really defensive, it's really important that you learn to hold space and allow them to speak through. The only time Shani will interrupt me is if she needs clarification on something I said. So maybe I wasn't clear on what I said, or maybe she wasn't sure how to interpret what I said. And that's when she'll kind of interrupt and speak for clarification. Otherwise, she'll kind of let me speak through and vice versa. The final thing I want to give you today is the understanding that it's probably going to be clunky initially. So was walking the first time you tried. I'm sure squatting was the first time you tried. Like everything's a little bit clunky to start. So don't beat yourself up. Don't beat your partner up if they're a little bit clunky. Just take your time with this process and chip away at it. And again, you know, if I think about our journey with this, I wouldn't be able to tell you how the first 10 or 15 went. It's so long ago, but I do remember like states of anxiety and a little bit uncomfortable. So if that's what you're feeling and it feels a bit clunky and it feels a bit awkward and it feels a bit anxiety producing, then you are in exactly the same boat as us. And I can tell you firsthand from having done it now for 3 years straight that we both get excited about the conversations, you know, that we have on a Sunday, and it's very easygoing, albeit there's a lot of tough conversations. And that's probably actually what I'll finish with. The tough conversations in general for us have meant that it's been an easy relationship. And if I look at previous relationships, avoiding the tough conversations is what made the relationship tougher. So if you can kind of have that in the back of your mind of like tough conversations equate to an easy relationship or an easier relationship, then that'll put you in good stead as you look to implement this into your relationship.